Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Rachel Tintle and I am the owner and designer behind the Creative Siren. Now, this week we are doing one of my favorite cups ever. I am sure that you guys have figured out by now that I have a huge love for all things mermaid. So this one has to come no surprise to anyone, but it is my signature mermaid cup. I have loved this cup since I first developed it. It's probably one of the only ones that I own personally because I just adore it so much, and I hope that you guys do too. This one came to me as a custom order, and I was a little hesitant when she said that she wanted the colors orange and teal, but I have to tell you, I am so glad that she suggested those colors because this thing is phenomenal. I'm so excited to see your guys' version of this design, and I really hope that you'll share it with me. I do want to warn you though that my phone died in the middle of recording, so I had to make a few adjustments in this week's tutorial, so I hope you guys will bear with me. Don't come at me. Well, with all of that being said, let's just go ahead and jump right in. Okay, starting off, like always, we're using a 14-ounce mug that is pre-sanded, and I've taped the tops and the bottoms. Now for this design, we are going to paint it first because the bulk of the design is going to be right on the handle. There's going to be a few embellishments in the middle, but otherwise it's mostly the handle. So here I've just grabbed a variety of oranges, going from darkest to lightest because I really want to create a dynamic gradient in the middle of this cup. And we're going to do the same thing with teal, and we're going to create that same gradient right on the outside. I'll go ahead and list the colors that I use in this video in the description below, but feel free to use whatever colors you like the best. So I wanted this color to be predominantly orange, so we're going to work from the middle out with our orange color. So whatever dominant color that you want to see the most, make sure that that is your middle color, and then your non-dominant color will spread out and blend into the outskirts. Now normally I don't show you a whole bunch of the painting process, but here I wanted to make sure that I showed you guys just how to do the blend correctly for anyone that has any trouble. So though it is sped up, like, please bear with me that it is a couple minutes long, but I really wanted you to see how I blended these colors. I also want to point out, don't concern yourself too much with making this blend perfect on your very first layer of paint. You're going to need roughly 2 to 3 layers to make sure that that color comes through really well and really vibrantly. So if you just have kind of a basic outline of your colors on your first coat, and then you start to bring in that blend on your second and third, it'll look beautiful at the end. And when it comes to blending, the trick here is really just not to put too much paint on your brush. You'll notice here, I know it's sped up, but you'll notice here that I'm just barely dipping it into the color, just enough to put a little bit on my brush, just to wet that a little bit. You also can wet your brush with just a little bit of water to help blend those creases without adding too much paint. Just be careful doing that too much. If you add too much water, it will pull up your paint, and we don't want that. We just want just a touch of it on your brush just to moisten it so that it'll blend those colors really well.
Once you've gotten your gradient to where you want it, and if you've taped it off like me, after it's fully dried, you can go ahead and remove the tape. If you don't have tape, don't concern yourself with this step, just skip right over it. So our next step is actually to start forming the tail. So I'm just grabbing a little piece of clay. Well, I mean, it's about a palm-sized piece of clay, and I'm rolling it out into a long, thin piece. It doesn't have to be too thin, but I mean, maybe about 1/8 of an inch thick. And I'm just cutting this down so it's roughly between, 5-6 inches long, and maybe no more than 1.5 inches wide. And then right here, I'm just rolling out a piece of clay. You're going to need 2 pieces of just rolled out clay because we're going to be sticking them on the side of our cup to start forming that tail. Now, do be sure that that tail part at the very bottom tapers down. You want the widest part of the tail to be at the top, and then the thinnest part of the tail to be at that bottom. And just press that clay into that handle really, really well so that it sticks there and doesn't peel up. And take that rolled out piece and just slice it down the middle. And we're going to take 1/2 and put it right on top of those 2 rolled out pieces, cutting off the excess down at the bottom and smushing in those sides. And then we're going to do the same thing for the underbelly of the handle. Now here's where I like to push the ends together, and I'm using a wax carving tool. It's got a little bit of a foot on it, and it helps me blend those ends into each other so it's one cohesive piece. And I'm going to do this on both sides. If you don't have these wax carving tools, I do suggest that you get them because they're really handy. But if you don't, you can use a silicone brush tool and it'll do the same thing, or you can smooth it with your fingers. These tools just make it easier. And then continue smoothing. So here you'll see that I'm kind of bringing in those side pieces into the middle and then smoothing it out together so that there are no lumps, no major divots. And once you've done that, just grab a little bit of rubbing alcohol on the tip of your finger and smooth out your tail. Any leftover lumps that are there or fingertip prints that you don't want showing, that rubbing alcohol will take it right out, and you just need a tiny little bit on the very tip of your finger. Okay, next we're going to cut out our fin. So I've just rolled out a piece of clay, and I'm just free cutting it to how I want it to look. There's no perfect way to do this fin, but if anybody's interested, I can put a template in my VIP group. Now, when we lay this here, you'll notice that I don't have it right up to the edge of the handle. You're going to want it about 1/2 inch to 1 inch out. That's because we're going to add more embellishments there. And then take some liquid Sculpey and put it on the underbelly of your fin, just so that it sticks to the mug and it's not sliding around. After I've placed it where I want it, I'm going to grab just a paintbrush and clean up any excess liquid Sculpey that is coming out from the sides. And then I'll start to round out the edges so that it doesn't look like I just cut it out. And then those points on the tips of the fins, I like to kind of drag those out a little bit to create a nice, like, sharp tip of those fins. This tail reminds me more of like a dolphin tail mixed with a beta, and you'll see that later. But you can do a variety of tails. There's just so many of them out there. Now this part is going to be filling in that 1/2 inch to 1 inch part that we left between the tail and the fin. and it's just a long triangle. And we're gonna fit it right at the base of our handle, and then kind of very gently stretch it towards the end of the fin. And you'll see here I'm using that wax carving tool to blend in those edges, so again it looks like one big cohesive piece. And then I'm stretching that that pointed end out to the very end of my fin. And if you have excess, just go ahead and cut it off, and then you can smooth out the rest. Now here I'm just blending the edges that meet together with the fin and the tail, because I don't want to look like it's just a piece of clay sitting on top. I really want it looking like it's a tail, you know, that was all formed together. So I'm just blending those edges, and I'm going to do that all the way around. Okay, so this is the part where my phone died on my previous recording. So I'm going to be showing you how I make the fin here on a separate mug. So here I'm just grabbing an extruder and I'm extruding these long thin lines. They're one of the smaller discs, but just play around with the thicknesses to see which one you like. I think this is the smallest or the second smallest disc that I'm using. And I'm going to line the outside of my fin on both sides with one of these rolled out extruded pieces. And I like to cut mine a little longer than the rest of the fin, and that's because we're going to blend it out to really create those sharp edges on the edge of that fin. And again, like we've done with everything else, we're going to blend those edges between this extruded piece and the rest of the fin so that they meet, or so that they match up really well. And do that on both sides. And then here I'm just taking a hobby knife and I'm cutting the very edge at a diagonal so it's a really sharp edge. And then just pulling it out with my silicone tip tool. So that same process that I did on the edge, I'm going to do here to give it kind of a jagged fin look. And so you're just going to apply gentle pressure with your silicone tip tool. You can also do this with your finger if you don't have this tool, but you're just going to drag it out so that it gets thinner as you drag it out, and it almost looks like rougher. Like it gives it like this tattered beta tail look. And just keep doing that until you're happy with the overall look. If you don't want it super jagged, you don't have to do this piece. I just personally think that it looks more like, you know, a fish tail with these jagged fins. And then go ahead and grab another extruded piece, and you're gonna run it down the middle of your fin, almost to give it like some ribbing or some boning, just to add extra detail there. And once you finish doing it to the one side, go ahead and add that detailed ribbing to the other side. And then blend with your silicone tip tool those edges into the fin. And once you get to the edge of your fin, then you'll blend and pull out that, for lack of a better term, that ribbing, so that it blends with that jagged edge really well. Once you're done doing all your blending, you're going to grab this wax carving tool. It almost looks like a dental pick, and you're going to drag it from the top end of your fin all the way down to the bottom to create those ridges that you would normally see in a fish tail. If you don't have this wax carving tool, you can use a needle tip tool. There's also the serrated silicone tip tool that you can use. Just use whatever you have on hand. Actually, you can even use a butter knife if you don't have any of the above. But we're just trying to create those little divots that look like ruffles within that fin. Now that we finished the details on the fin, we're going to move on to adding the detailed scales on the body of our mermaid tail. So I'm going to be using this crescent shaped tool that I got in a fondant toolkit. It looks like little half moons, and if you just press down into your clay, it'll create that scale like divot. You can also actually use a straw and just cut it in half, and it'll give you the same look if you don't have that tool. Now when you're using this, be sure to get those sides, but don't worry about the underbelly. Once you have your details looking exactly the way that you want them, go ahead and stick this in the oven, following the directions on the back of the packaging of the clay that you are using. This is a really important step just because every piece of clay is different. And you should probably, because of the thickness of the clay that we're using, it should probably go in for no less than 45 minutes to an hour. Once your clay is fully baked and has cooled, you can start painting the tail. Now here I'm going to paint the main body of the tail this very bright orange. It's the same orange that I used in the middle of our gradient. And I'm just going to paint that whole thing and then take it down to that ribbing that we did right on the fin. Once you're done painting the main body of your tail, we're going to go ahead and paint the fin. Now, originally I had painted the fin like a lighter orange, but then changed my mind and you can kind of see it there. I decided to use the teal because I feel like the orange was blending too much into the gradient that I had in the background. When your fin is all done, go ahead and take that teal color and dab it in the very middle, and we're going to drag it down the middle of the main body of your tail, and it's going to kind of come to a point. So it's going to be bold and dark at the very top, and then just start to get lighter and smaller as you go down. And then here I took that light orange and I highlighted right around the very edge of that teal, and then I dragged that down even further onto the body of the tail. Once you're done painting your tail, allow it to dry completely, because our next step is we're going to be highlighting the whole thing with mica powder. Now here I'm using Vanishing Blueberry and Vanishing Copper. So the blueberry will go on the teal parts and the copper will go on the orange parts. So here I'm using some polyacrylic just to attach the micas, and like a soft bristled brush. This is actually just like an old eyeshadow brush that I use for my crafts, to go ahead and blend those micas into the grooves of your tail. And we're gonna do this for the entire tail here. So like I said before, use that Vanishing Blueberry color on all of your teals, and then take that Vanishing Copper color and blend that into your oranges. And it's really just gonna make that color pop and give it a really subtle shimmer, which I adore. Now when you're brushing on your polyacrylic, just go really light with it. You really don't want to gob it on there, otherwise it'll be dripping everywhere. And if you don't have polyacrylic, you can do this with Tack It or Mod Podge as well. Once your tail is completely dry, you're going to go ahead and brush your polyacrylic, Mod Podge, or Tack It onto the body of your mug. And I'm using 3 different kinds of flakes here, and these are translucent flakes by Simply Sarah. I think I'm using Guppy, Tetra, and Rainbow Trout, and I'm just switching back and forth between all 3 colors and very lightly tapping it onto my polyacrylic with my fan brush. As I've told you guys before, I love using a fan brush because it doesn't overdo the amount of flakes and it just scatters them randomly, which is the look we're going for. When you're done adding micas to the body of your mug, go ahead and set your mug aside, because now I'm going to go over how to make the shells that are going to outline the decal on your mug. The first shell is called a cowrie shell, and you usually see them on like Hawaiian necklaces just because they have a bead-like shape to them. So you're going to take like a pea-sized bit of clay and you're going to round it out to look like a coffee bean. And once you've got it into the shape that you like, you're going to take a needle tool and you're going to drag it, like press it hard down into it to make that divot, and then drag it out. You're going to do that on both sides. And then take your needle tool and you're just going to create like these little teeth in the middle. I mean, they just look like coffee beans with teeth to me, but they're really great for small filler spaces on your mug. Next up is a sand dollar. So again, we're going to take a pea-sized bit of clay and we're going to round it out, but we're going to press down on the edges so that the edges of this little disc that you're making are thinner than the very middle of it. Once you get it to the desired shape, go ahead and grab your needle tool and you're just going to press down lightly and then drag out in the middle and create like a star shape with these little divots. I know that this isn't entirely accurate for how a sand dollar actually looks, but it gets the point across without too much effort since we're using these as all fillers. Next shell is a clam shell. Again, we're going to use a pea-sized bit and we're going to split it in half. And we're going to take the one half that we kept and we're going to kind of form it into like a flower petal or a teardrop, just so that one side kind of comes to a point. And on the other side, you want to flare out a little bit more. When you get it to your desired shape, go ahead and grab that needle tool and we're just going to create lines going from the bottom to the top. Just like that. And then take your other piece and we're going to roll it out. You probably don't need the whole piece because we're just rolling out a very thin little bit that's going to attach to the bottom. You don't want this part too long because it's supposed to be like the joint of the clam shell. So once you get it to your desired thickness, go ahead and just tear off the edges of the extra clay and then round it out with your fingers. And then take that piece and press it into the bottom of the body of your shell. Our next shell is going to be a long spiral shell. So just roll out a piece of clay. You'll want it, maybe like 4 inches long and not too thin. So it's got a little bit of thickness. And we're going to take our needle tool and we're going to wrap this clay around that needle tool. It just makes it so much easier than just trying to wrap it yourself. And once you get to the edge of the needle, just pinch the end off. And then pull that little spiral off your needle. And we're going to go ahead and kind of give it a little bit of pressure just on the very end, just so it kind of comes to this tip. And there you go. After that, we're going to do the same technique, but we're doing a different kind of spiral shell, more like a sea snail shell. This one, you're going to want it to come to a tip, so it's going to taper from smallest to biggest. And then take that smaller end and start rolling it into each other. This is the one that's kind of going to look like Ursula's necklace. Now, I forgot to show it in the video, but after I do roll up this little sea snail, I like to take my needle tool and I make like these vertical lines going from the center out, just to give it a little bit of texture, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Next up is our sea star. So very much like the beginning where we did our sand dollar, we're going to roll this out into a disc. But instead of tapering the edges like we did with the sand dollar, you're going to make this even all the way around. Once you get it to the shape and the thickness that you like, you're going to take your hobby knife and you're going to cut these triangle shapes off to the side. And you'll see that we're just creating the arms of our sea star. I know it doesn't look like it now, but bear with me and you'll see it in just a second. So right now we've got maybe a head and an arm, another arm, and then the 2 legs down at the bottom. When you're finished cutting out the main bit of your sea star, you're going to take your hobby knife and now you're going to cut into those arms and legs, creating a point at the very end. And it's okay if these legs don't look absolutely perfect. Remember that sea stars will frequently detach their arms and legs and grow new ones, so they don't always look, super perfect. Just as long as that they come to a tip at the end, I think that's the most important part. Once you've cut your sea star into the shape that you want it, go ahead and pick it up and start rounding out those edges and really bring those arms and legs and his little head to a tip. To a point. And this is a good place where you can even out those areas where maybe it's thicker, and you can kind of either cut them off or you can push them into the main body. Now afterwards, I like to take my dotting tool. It's just a small round ball tool, and I like to dot the top to give it added texture. And that's it. Now for our final little embellishment, this one isn't a shell, but I like to add it because it gives it a tropical feel. We're doing like a little plumeria flower. So take maybe a little bit bigger than a pea-sized bit of clay and rip it into 5 equal pieces. And we're going to shape each piece into a small petal. Once all of your petals are done, start arranging them around just like a flower. Each petal will sit right on top of the last one. The only difference is with a plumeria is that that very last petal will sit on top of the one before it, but then underneath the first one. It's kind of tricky, so just be careful. And then take your needle tip tool and we're just going to run it from the middle to the very end just to create these little creases within the petal. Now you can add more creases than just the one here if you really want to add those extra details. I don't always do it just because I figure we're painting them all white and they're just going to be filler for our decal. Once you're done creating all your seashells, we're going to start placing them on the cup to go around our decal. Now here I did add a little sea star onto my tail just because the sea star ended up being a little bit bigger than what I wanted to be around our decal, and you can certainly do the same if you'd like. So I've created this little template of an oval. It's about 3.5 inches tall and 2.78 inches wide. Now you may want to alter this if you don't tape off your tops and bottoms like I do. So I'm just going to place my little template here just to give me a rough outline for where I want to put our shells. And just start placing them sporadically around the edge of that template, whatever looks good. And those little coffee bean seashells that we made, those are perfect fillers to place in between maybe the bigger shells that we created. When you've got enough shells around your template that you can kind of get a rough idea of how big it is, you can remove your template and safely put the rest of your clay shells around that space without fear of interfering with your decal. Now I always like to put my plumeria flowers at the top on the side of a sea star, but that's just me. You can go ahead and start painting all the little embellishments on the side here white. I prefer to do it white so that it doesn't take away from the rest of the design, but obviously you're free to do it any color you like. I just prefer the white. And then off to the side, the little sea star that I have on top of my tail, I just did that like a coral color. It's called Tropical Orange, and so I thought it blended in really well. When you're all finished painting your shells, we're going to start epoxying. Now I've slowed this part down a little bit because I've gotten a lot of questions about epoxying a sculpted tumbler. So just so that you guys can see, I don't put a whole lot of epoxy on. It's very little because if you do too much, you're going to lose all of those gorgeous details that you worked so hard on. So here I'm literally just dipping my fingers in my cup of epoxy and then lightly spreading it around. The only parts that I'll add a little bit extra are here on these shells, just to make sure that all those nooks and crannies around those shells are covered really well. And then I'll be sure to hit them really well with a heat gun, just so all the excess epoxy will come dripping off of it. But otherwise, it's an extremely thin layer. Think about using the same amount of epoxy that you would use when doing the epoxy method when you're glittering a tumbler. Like, when I'm talking thin, that's how thin I mean. And then of course, as always, hit it with a heat gun or with your torch just to get rid of any nasty bubbles that may have popped up. When your epoxy is all cured, go ahead and start getting your decal ready to place on your mug. Now I'll have this decal available to anybody who wants it in my Facebook group. You just have to add it and it'll be free. I like to use just a clean towel to place my mug so that I know that it's propped up on that handle and so that I can clearly see where the center is for my decal. Now after adding my decal, I got these little rhinestones and I like to add them around the very edge of those seashell embellishments. So these are like rainbow rhinestones, and I'll add one on the top and the bottom, so north and south and east and west of my little oval here. And then I'll fill the rest in with the remaining rhinestones. I usually add about 3 and I just space them evenly between the markers that I've put on. Now try and be really precise when you're putting on these rhinestones because the glue that they have on there sticks really well and it's hard to move without losing that glue. When you're done adding the rhinestones, this is where I take these cute little pearls and I'll place them in between each set of rhinestones. I just feel like this gives it like an extra mermaidy pop to that decal. Now after you're done placing these pearls and these rhinestones, go ahead and let this sit for a couple of hours. I would even zap it real quick with a heat gun to make sure that that glue is really stuck on there, because the last thing that you want is to start epoxying this thing and then have your rhinestones and your pearls like floating everywhere. And now to hit it with your final coat of epoxy. Again, we're not going very heavy on the epoxy, just really light, just enough to give this a really good cover so that nothing moves, and then zap it with your heat gun. And now you have a beautiful mermaid mug to match your mermaid soul. If you love this video, be sure to click here to see our last video. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another tutorial. See you later. Bye!